right, so today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the world of Kabbalah. Specifically, we've gotten some excerpts from a text all about the 10 Sephirots, and it seems like this source really wants to use those Sephirots to look at just about everything.
hmm
Yeah, like we've got thoughts and actions and maybe even the universe itself, kind of like if you had a set of blueprints. But instead of just for buildings, it was for like all of reality.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take on it. So often we get caught up in all these abstract ideas about the Sephirot, but this source really seems to want to zero in on how we can use them practically in our everyday lives.
Exactly, yeah. Before we go and apply these Sephirots to everything, though, can you remind me what exactly this source says the Sephirot are?
Basically, they describe them as these spiritual dimensions. They're kind of like emanations of divine energy, and they make up like the very fabric of creation.
Hmm.
And this source really uses the classic tree of life imagery to help us visualize how they all fit together.
Ah, the tree of life. Always such a powerful image. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. So picture a tree with three main pillars. You've got mercy, judgment, and equilibrium. And each of the Sephirot is like a branch on that tree. They're all interconnected, and they kind of flow downwards from Keter, the crown, which sits at the very top.
Right, Keter. The ultimate source. The pure divine will. Now, this source also talks about the Sephirot being like a celestial family, and I really love that analogy. So where do Chokhmah and Binah fit into that picture?
Well, think of Chokhmah as kind of like a father figure.
Hmm.
He's wise and insightful. He represents the initial flash of inspiration, that aha moment where you get a new idea and suddenly everything clicks.
Right.
And then Binah is more like the nurturing mother. She takes that raw potential from Chokhmah, and then she shapes it and gives it some structure.
Ah, so it's like Chokhmah has this brilliant but maybe a little bit messy idea, and Binah steps in and says, hold on, let's think this through and give it some boundaries.
Exactly.
So then, from those three superiors, as they're sometimes called, we move down the tree to the seven inferiors. And each of them has its own unique energy and connection to our world. And what I find really cool is that they're also linked to the planets and the days of the week.
Right.
So, for example, you have cheese representing loving kindness, and it's connected to Jupiter and Sunday. Does that mean every Sunday is just like overflowing with good vibes?
Well, not necessarily,
Yeah.
but it does give us a deeper appreciation for those subtle energies that are at play throughout the week. Like cheese being connected to Jupiter, Jupiter being the planet of expansion.
Yeah.
It suggests that true loving kindness, it goes beyond just, doing nice things for people. It's about this expansive generosity, both materially and spiritually.
Yeah, I like that. So it's not about blindly giving money away to every problem. It's about really looking at how we can expand our capacity to give on all levels.
Precisely.
And then as we move through the week, we encounter all the other Sephirot. So there's Gevurah, the principle of strength and discipline, and that's associated with Mars and Monday. And then Tiferet, which is beauty and harmony.
Yeah.
And that's linked to the sun and Tuesday. Wait, so if Tiferet is connected to the sun and Tuesday, does that explain why Tuesday always feels so good? Maybe.
It seems like it's all lining up.
It's really fascinating how all of these different parts of existence are woven together in this system.
Yeah.
Then there's Netzach, eternity and victory associated with Venus and Wednesday. Hod, splendor and glory linked to Mercury and Thursday. Yesod, the foundation associated with the moon and Friday. And finally,
Melchett, the kingdom. And what's interesting about Melchett is that it's linked to both Saturn through its connection to Binah and to Jerusalem, which represents the physical world, and also to Shabbat. It's like it bridges the spiritual and material realm.
Exactly. Melchett is where the rubber meets the road, you could say. It's where all of the other Sephiroths come together, and they manifest in our physical reality. It's the culmination of this whole flow of divine energy.
Okay, so we have this incredibly intricate system of energies and forces all interconnected. The question is, how do we actually apply it? How can understanding the Sephirot actually help us make decisions in our lives? This source gives an example of like a friend needing financial help, right?
Right.
It's a great way to illustrate how the see-free can guide us through real-life situations. So let's say your friend needs money, and your first instinct, driven by cheese, might be to just say, here, take what you need.
Sure, especially if you care about your friend and you don't want to see them struggling.
Of course.
Hmm.
But then Gevurah comes in, that principle of strength and discipline. And it might whisper in your ear, hold on, what if they're taking advantage of you? Is there maybe a smarter way to help?
It's like that classic battle between your head and your heart. Do you just follow your feelings of generosity? Or do you take a step back and consider all of the angles?
Exactly. And that's where Sephirot comes in, the Sephirah of balance and harmony. It's not about picking between cheese and Gevurah. It's about finding that middle path So maybe instead of just giving your friend money, you offer to help them create a budget or you connect them with some resources that could help. You find a way to be supportive without putting yourself in a difficult situation or potentially enabling unhealthy behaviors.
That's a really practical example, and it highlights how these seemingly opposing forces can actually work together. It's not about one being good and the other one being bad. It's about finding that sweet spot between them.
Exactly. And that's a key principle in Kabbalah. The Sephiroths are not a set of rules you have to rigidly follow. It's more about understanding how all these energies interact and then using that knowledge to make wise and balanced choices.
My head is already spinning a little bit,
Yeah.
and we've barely even scratched the surface here. We haven't even gotten to masculine and feminine energies or hidden and revealed aspects or those mysterious partsufim you mentioned. There's just so much to unpack here.
There's a lot more to explore.
All right, well, I am ready for more. So let's dive deeper into the world of the Sephirot after a quick break.
Now, where were we? Ah, yes, those masculine and feminine energies within the Sephirot. It's one of those things that often trips people up, so let's unpack it a bit.
Yeah. When I hear masculine and feminine, I immediately think about like gender roles and things, but I know that's not really what we're talking about here.
Exactly. In Kabbalah, these terms are really about spiritual functions. They exist in all of creation, and it's not about male or female in the way we normally think about it.
So which Sephirot are considered masculine and which ones are feminine? And what does that even mean in a spiritual context?
Good questions. So the masculine Sephirot are all about giving. They're about outward expression and expansion. They represent the active force that kind of kickstarts creation, like an outward flow of divine energy.
Okay, I think I'm following. So what about the feminine Sephirot then?
They're about receiving and discerning, more of an inward focus. They're the forces that shape and refine things. They kind of provide the structure and containment for all that masculine energy.
Ah, so it's like this cosmic dance between giving and receiving, between expansion and containment. So how does that actually play out in the specific Sephirot,
Well, if you look at Melchut, for example,
which represents the physical world,
exactly. Melchut is considered feminine because it's all about receiving.
and manifesting that divine energy?
Right? It takes everything from the other Sephirot and it brings it down into being.
Kind of like the earth receiving a seed and nurturing it into a plant.
That's a great analogy.
So Melchut's like the ultimate receiver. It takes in all of that divine energy and makes it tangible in our world. And what about Binah, the Sephirah of understanding? That one's also considered feminine, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Because Binah gives form and structure to the raw potential of Chokhmah. Remember that analogy of Chokhmah being like the father with the brilliant idea?
Yeah.
Well, Binah is like the mother. She takes that idea and she helps refine it and shape it into something real. It's a discerning quality, a kind of careful consideration. And that's what makes it feminine in this context.
So it's not just passively taking things in, it's also about actively shaping and refining.
Okay.
That makes sense. But I'm still a little confused about Gevurah and Had. They're both about judgment, which to me seems like it would be more of a feminine quality.
That's a sharp observation.
Mhm.
And you're right that judgment often involves discernment.
Which we've associated with the feminine.
Right. But in the case of Gevurah and Hod, their judgment is part of this bigger system of justice.
Right.
Which is represented by Zir Anpin. So they're not about shaping and refining things in the same way Binah does. They're more about upholding boundaries and maintaining balance within the whole system.
Yeah, so it's more about their function within that larger structure, not just the specific quality of judgment itself. That makes things a lot clearer. So we've got this constant interplay between masculine and feminine energies flowing through the entire tree of life, and each one has this really crucial role to play.
Right, and that leads us to another fascinating aspect of the Sephirot. They're hidden and revealed aspects. This source describes it like an iceberg, where you only see the tip above the water. But there's this whole massive structure hidden beneath the surface.
Ooh, I like that. So every Sephirah has like an outward face and a secret inner world?
Exactly. Think about it like giving someone a gift. The act of giving the gift, the physical object and the gesture, that's the revealed aspect. But the intention behind it, the thoughtfulness, the generosity, that's a hidden dimension.
That's a perfect example. It's like the difference between what you do and why you do it.
Precisely. And this source mentions this interesting substitution that sometimes happens in Kabbalistic teachings, where Keter the crown is replaced with da'at, which represents knowledge.
Hmm.
And the substitution is all about this idea of inner and outer aspects.
So Keter, the ultimate source, stays hidden from us in this physical realm. But Dot represents the knowledge and understanding that we can access. It's like we get these glimpses of the divine through Da'at, but the true essence of Keter remains veiled.
Exactly. And this source suggests that the full revelation of Keter will only happen in the world to come. And they connect this to the divine name, E-H-E-Y-E-H, which means I will be.
Wow, that's beautiful. It's like we're on this cosmic treasure hunt, and every layer we uncover brings us a little bit closer to understanding the ultimate mystery. Okay, so we've covered the Sephirot as spiritual dimensions. We talked about how they relate on the Tree of Life, their roles in the celestial family, the interplay of masculine and feminine energies, and even these hidden and revealed aspects. But you mentioned something earlier called Partsufim, and I have to admit, I'm completely lost on that one.
Ah, yes, Partsufim. Think of them as like complex configurations of the Sephirot. They're like specific arrangements that represent different levels of how the divine manifests. So instead of 10 individual Sephirot, we have these groupings that create whole new dynamics.
So it's like taking individual ingredients and combining them to make different recipes.
That's a great way to put it. And this source mentions 5 general Partsufim. There's Arich Anpin associated with Keter, which represents that pure desire to give. It's like an overflowing fountain of divine love and generosity. Then there's Abba, which is linked to Chokhmah and represents that creative force, the initial impulse to bring something new into being.
And where does Binah fit in with the Partsufim?
Binah is associated with Imma, sometimes called the super system or even the Talit. It represents that encompassing, nurturing aspect of the divine feminine.
I love those images. It gives you a sense of warmth and containment. And what about the other 2 Partsufim?
Well, there's Zier Ampin, which is all about the system of justice. It encompasses all of the planets from the moon to Saturn, and it represents that realm of cause and effect where our actions have consequences. And finally, there's Nukva, which is linked to Malchut, and it represents the desire to receive and to embody the divine light in the physical world.
Wow. So we've gone from 10 individual Sephirot to these 5 complex Partsufim, each with its own unique function and purpose in the grand scheme of things.
It's like those Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah.
Each one containing another layer of complexity.
Okay, with all this talk about divine energies and realms and configurations, it's easy to get lost in the abstract. But we started this conversation by saying this source wants to apply the Sephirot to everything. So how does understanding Malchat, the Sephirah of the physical world, actually help us navigate daily life?
That's the million-dollar question. And this source has some really interesting things to say about Malchut's function and how it impacts our experience.
Okay, I'm all ears. Okay, so we left off talking about Malchat as this like mirror reflecting the divine light. How does that actually play out in our lives?
Well, this source says that Malchut's main job is to actually reveal God's presence in the world. So it's like a mirror, reflecting the divine light down into our reality.
Okay, but wouldn't that reflection be constant? I mean, if Malchut's like a mirror, shouldn't God's light always be shining through?
That's where it gets interesting. This source says the strength of that reflection, like how clear the mirror is. It actually depends on what we do as humans. So when we act in alignment with the divine will, Malchut's like this perfectly polished mirror, and it reflects the divine light super brightly.
So it's like we all have a role in either amplifying or dimming that reflection.
Exactly. The source even says that when humanity kind of goes off track, when our actions obscure the divine light, Malchut's reflection gets weaker.
Wow, that's intense. It means we have a lot more responsibility than we might realize. But how do we know when our actions are obscuring the divine light? That seems kind of vague.
It is a complex question, but the source offers this helpful analogy. Think about the moon and how it waxes and wanes.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So just like the moon goes through these cycles of fullness and diminishment, Malchut does too.
Precisely. When we're living in alignment with the divine will, Malchut's like a full moon, just beaming divine light into the world. But when we stray from the path, when our actions create disharmony and separation, it's like the moon is waning, and the reflection becomes dimmer.
I'm starting to see how understanding these Sephirots, and especially Malchut, it's not just some intellectual exercise. It actually has real consequences for how we live our lives.
Absolutely. It gives us this whole new way of looking at things, not just understanding the forces that are at work, but also our role in shaping the reality we experience.
Okay, so we've covered the Tree of Life, masculine and feminine energies, even those complex Partsufins. And now this idea that Malchut kind of fluctuates based on our actions. My brain is officially full.
I can imagine.
Is there anything else the source highlights that we should touch on before we wrap things up?
There is one more idea that really stood out to me. It's the idea that each Sephirah can also be understood in terms of its own internal dynamics, like it has its own inner structure.
Wait, so it's like those Russian nesting dolls you were talking about. Each Sephirah is a whole world unto itself.
Exactly, and this source actually refers to these inner structures as worlds within each Sephirah. Each world represents a different level of manifestation, from the most abstract spiritual stuff down to the most concrete physical things.
Oh, we're going deep here.
We are.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by worlds within a Sephirah?
Sure. Let's take cheese.
Loving kindness.
Right. In its most abstract form, cheese is this pure, boundless love of the divine. That's like its highest world. But as that love flows down through the Sephirot, it takes on all these different qualities and expressions. So in another world within cheese, that love might manifest as compassion for others, or a willingness to forgive, or a desire to help those in need. And in its most concrete form, cheese might express itself through acts of generosity and charity, or even just a kind word or gesture.
So each Sephirah contains within it this whole spectrum of possibilities, from like the purest essence to its most tangible expressions.
That's it. And this applies to all 10 of the Sephirah. So even something like loving kindness, it has all these layers of depth and complexity that we can explore.
I see that. But does this idea of worlds within the Sephirah actually mean anything for us practically? Or is it just a theoretical thing?
I think it has some really profound implications, especially when we're talking about personal growth and spiritual development.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does it connect to those things?
Well, if each Sephirah has these different levels of manifestation, it suggests that our own understanding and experience of each Sephirah can also evolve and deepen over time.
So it's like we're not just passively receiving the energy of each Sephirah, we're actually engaging with it and shaping it through our own consciousness.
Exactly. It means we're not limited to a fixed understanding of things like loving kindness or strength or any of the Sephirah. We can always keep exploring their deeper nuances and find new ways to express them in our lives.
I love that. It takes the Sephirot from being these static concepts to these dynamic processes that we can actually participate in. But how do we do that? How do we access these different worlds within each Sephirah and really deepen our understanding?
That's where practices like meditation and contemplation and study come in. When we engage with these practices, we start to cultivate a greater awareness of our inner landscape and how the energies of the Sephirot are playing out within us.
So it's not just about reading about the Sephirah in a book. It's about experiencing them directly through our own exploration.
That's the key. And as we deepen our understanding of the Sephirot within ourselves, we naturally start to see them reflected in the world around us.
This is amazing stuff. But I have to say my brain is feeling a bit fried. We started with the 10 Sephirot, and now we're talking about multiple worlds within each one. How much deeper does this rabbit hole go?
It's true. Kabbalah is known for its intricate layers of meaning and symbolism. But the key is to approach it with curiosity and a sense of wonder. Don't get too overwhelmed by the complexity.
You're right, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. And with each layer, you get a new aroma, a new flavor, a new dimension of understanding.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And remember, you don't have to grasp everything all at once. The beauty of Kabbalah is that it unfolds gradually over time.
Well, thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into the world of the Sephirot. It's been a really fascinating journey. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. We hope this has given you a new perspective on Kabbalah and how it can be applied to your life. Until next time.